Something doesn't add up in global migration patterns. When Syrian families fled their war-torn country, they could have headed south to Saudi Arabia, same religion, same language, vast oil wealth. Instead, they traveled thousands of miles north to Germany. Afghan translators who worked with Western forces had the option to relocate to nearby Qatar, where they'd fit in culturally. Many chose Finland instead. This pattern repeats across the Muslim world. Somali refugees bypassed the gleaming towers of Dubai to reach Stockholm. Iraqi families escaping war passed by Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, only to end up in Sweden or Germany thousands of miles away. The numbers tell the story clearly. Europe hosts millions of Muslim refugees, while some of the world's richest Muslim countries host almost none, at least not officially. The UAE, with its massive foreign population, recognizes just 1,400 refugees. Saudi Arabia hosts over 5 million foreign workers, but virtually no refugees. Why do desperate people fleeing persecution bypass wealthy neighbors to reach distant lands where they'll always be outsiders? The answer reveals two completely different approaches to human displacement and fundamentally different ideas about who deserves to belong. Europe's approach to refugees was forged in the aftermath of World War II, when millions of displaced people wandered across a devastated continent. European leaders created something unprecedented, a legal framework that gave refugees specific rights simply because they were fleeing persecution. The 1951 Refugee Convention established a simple principle: people escaping danger deserve protection regardless of their economic value. European countries didn't just sign this agreement, they built entire government departments around it. Here's how it works in practice. When someone reaches the German border claiming asylum, they enter a legal process. They get a hearing before specialized courts. They receive legal representation. While their case is processed, they get housing, healthcare, and their children attend school for free. If approved, they're put on a path toward permanent residence and eventually citizenship. Sweden takes this even further. Refugees receive comprehensive integration services, including 2 years of language training, vocational education, and civic orientation courses. The goal isn't just to warehouse people temporarily, it's to turn them into productive members of society. France offers a clear progression from refugee status to permanent residence, typically within a few years. Germany has naturalized over 130,000 people annually in recent years, while many of them former refugees. These aren't exceptions, they're the normal functioning of systems designed around the idea that refugees deserve not just safety but membership. This rights-based approach transforms how refugees think about their futures. They can bring families, start businesses, buy homes, vote in local elections. They're not just surviving, they're building new lives with legal guarantees that those lives won't be arbitrarily destroyed. In the Gulf, migration was never about protecting people. It was about using them. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman all follow the same playbook. The kafala system shows how it works. Foreign workers get permits tied to a single employer who acts as their legal sponsor. Want to change jobs? You need your sponsor's permission. Lose your job? You lose your right to stay. Get sick or injured? Your sponsor can send you home. It's a system built for maximum control and minimum commitment. In this setup, there's no difference between someone fleeing war and someone just looking for better wages. Everyone gets the same temporary permit, the same lack of rights, the same uncertainty about tomorrow. The numbers tell the story. The UAE's population is about 90% foreign-born, but it officially recognizes only 1,400 refugees according to UN data. Think about that. 9 out of 10 people you meet in Dubai weren't born there, but fewer than 1,500 have refugee status. Saudi Arabia is an even starker example. The kingdom hosts more than 13 million foreign workers, one of the highest numbers in the world. But ask how many refugees they've accepted, and the answer is basically zero. That creates absurd situations. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians live in Saudi Arabia, but they're labeled as guest workers, not refugees. Same people, different label, completely different rights. A Syrian family in Germany gets asylum protection and integration support. A Syrian family in Riyadh gets a work permit that can be revoked at any time. The Gulf states never signed the 1951 Refugee Convention. They have no legal obligation to provide protection. Instead, they've perfected a system that extracts maximum value from foreign workers while taking zero long-term responsibility for their lives. The real reason Gulf states keep their doors shut isn't bureaucracy or paperwork. It's fear. Fear of losing power. Their rulers know one thing. A refugee isn't just a hungry, displaced person. A refugee is living proof of how regimes collapse, how people rise up, how dictators fall. And for monarchies built on absolute control, that knowledge is poison. Think back to the Arab Spring. In Tunisia, Egypt, Bahrain, Libya, entire regimes fell apart in just weeks. For Gulf rulers, the lesson was clear. If angry crowds can bring down governments there, they could bring them down here too. That's why Syrians, Yemenis, and Iraqis are kept out. They're not just victims. They carry political memory, revolutionary experience, and the idea of change. And nothing terrifies Gulf monarchies more than that. Here's the hypocrisy. The Gulf spends billions polishing its global image with World Cups, Formula One tracks, glittering skyscrapers, and mega malls. They donate huge sums to refugee camps abroad, but there's always one condition. The refugees must stay out of the Gulf. And then there's citizenship, the cruelest joke of all. Families who've lived there for generations, whose children are born and raised in Dubai or Riyadh, are still called guest workers. Their whole lives play out under the label of temporary. In the Gulf, citizenship is like a showroom item. You can look at it, but you'll never own it. The truth is simple. For these monarchies, taking in refugees isn't a humanitarian duty. It's a direct threat to regime security. And in their eyes, a refugee isn't a person. They're a political risk waiting to explode. The refugee policies of Gulf states are shaped by hard political calculations. The Arab Spring showed how quickly governments can fall, especially when people face poverty or political exclusion. Gulf monarchies learned a clear lesson from those uprisings. Refugees are not just victims. They're potential risks because they've already lived through state collapse and social revolution. They know how regimes fall. They know what alternatives look like. And for absolute monarchies built on strict control, that knowledge is dangerous. This fear shows up in tight restrictions on political activity. Foreign residents in the Gulf cannot join political organizations, stage demonstrations, or take part in anything that looks politically sensitive. Even a social media post critical of the government can get you deported. Europe faces a different calculation. Taking in refugees reinforces its story about democracy, human rights, and moral leadership. Politicians can point to refugee integration as proof of their values. But Europe also pays a price. Anti-immigrant parties across the continent use fears about culture, cost, and security to gain support. These pressures have pushed governments towards stricter asylum laws and tighter borders. The difference is this. Europe manages its tensions through democratic debate while keeping its basic refugee commitments. Gulf states avoid the problem entirely by keeping refugees out from the start. At the same time, the Gulf buys international credibility with money. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are among the world's biggest humanitarian donors, funding camps and aid programs across the Middle East and Africa. It lets them claim generosity abroad while avoiding responsibility at home. The patterns become clear when you look at the big picture. Europe built a system based on rights and belonging. The Gulf built a system based on labor and control. That explains why refugees make what seem like irrational choices to travel thousands of extra miles to reach Europe. They're not just seeking safety, they're seeking membership. They want places where their children can grow up as equals, where they can build permanent communities, where they have legal rights that can't be taken away by an employer or a policy change. But this system puts enormous strain on European societies, while some of the world's wealthiest countries avoid real responsibility. European voters are asking if they should keep carrying the burden, while their wealthy neighbors send money but take in almost no refugees. This imbalance is neither fair nor sustainable. Europe's capacity has limits, both political and practical. The Gulf has the money to help, but no institutions and no incentive to do so. So the real question isn't whether this setup is fair. It clearly isn't. The question is how long it can last before something breaks. Europe is already moving toward more restrictive policies. The Gulf faces its own demographic pressures as citizen minorities shrink compared to foreign majorities. How long can Europe carry the world's refugee burden, while the Gulf perfects the art of selective responsibility? The answer will shape migration and global politics for decades to come.